Town of Los Gatos Planning Commission meeting of Wednesday, April 24, 2019 is now called to order. Please take a moment to silence your devices. Ms. Arnowitz, would you please call the roll?
Yes, thank you. Commissioner Badami?
Here.
Thank you. Commissioner Birch?
Here.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Here.
Commissioner Janoff?
Here.
Vice Chair Hanson?
Here.
And Chair Hudes.
Here. And note that Commissioner Tavana is absent.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So I would ask that everyone stand and join Commissioner O'Donnell in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
As the Planning Commission conducts this meeting this evening, on behalf of the Town Council and residents of Los Gatos, we encourage active participation, which is essential for democracy and critical to the work of the Planning Commission. That participation can occur through written comments about agenda items submitted to staff prior to the meeting, and those are always welcome and helpful. And during the meeting, there are two opportunities for members of the public to participate. During the verbal communications period, people may speak about any topic that is not on the agenda. And during the hearing on a specific item, any member of the public may speak about an item that is on the agenda. If you wish to address the Commission tonight during the verbal communications period or during consideration of an agenda item, please complete a speaker card located on the back of the benches where you're seated. Turn the card into a staff member and please print your name clearly. When you speak, I ask that you come up to the podium and adjust the microphone so that you are speaking directly into it. Please state your name and address for the record. In fairness to all who want to speak at this meeting, it's requested that you limit your comments to 3 minutes. The first opportunity is the verbal communications portion of our meeting. Members are invited to speak about any issue that is not on the agenda of tonight's meeting. I don't have any cards on this. Does anyone have an item that is not on the agenda? Okay, thank you. We'll move on to the consent calendar. We have one consent item to be acted before single motion. Any member of the public or the commission may request it be removed from the consent agenda. At the chair's discretion, they may be considered either before or after the regular items. So the first item is approval of the minutes, April 10, 2019. Do we have a motion on the consent calendar? Commissioner Badami.
I move to approve the minutes from April 10th of 2019.
Thank you. We have a second? Yes.
I'll second.
Okay, thank you. All in favor? Opposed? Okay, passes unanimously. So now we move on to item number 2, which is 248 Jared Lane, the architecture and site application S-16-054, requesting approval for construction of a new single-family residence and removal of large protected trees on vacant property zoned HR1, APN 532-34071. Property owner, applicant Sam Pan, and the project planner is Sean Mullen. This item has been continued from April 11, May 23, June 27, September 26, November 14, December 12, 2018, and January 9, March 13, 2019. May I have a show of hands from the commissioners who visited the property under consideration? Okay, any disclosures? Okay, so Mr. Mullen, I understand you'll give the report tonight.
Thank you. The Planning Commission last considered this application on January 9th, 2019, and continued the item to allow the applicant to address comments related to architecture and massing, excavation, LRDA, and neighbor outreach. The applicant completed the revisions in response to these comments and presents a revised project tonight. Overall, the floor area of the residence has been reduced by 1,082 square feet and the width of the residence by 21 feet. The Spanish architecture is now more reflective of the original design, And to address concerns with massing and visibility of the west elevation, the applicant revised the retaining wall design to taper the grade up higher on the building and provide greater area for landscape screening along the west elevation. The garage remains pulled south, although with reduced portions of it located outside of the LRDA, allowing the residents to more effectively step down the hill. Additionally, the garage has been pushed east, allowing the floor level of the garage to be raised relative to its original position, which helps reduce the excavation and disturbance of land outside of the LRDA. Overall, the excavation has been reduced in quantity and depth within the footprint of the residence in response to the Commission's direction. The revised design was reviewed by the town's architectural consultant, who provided 7 recommendations to improve the design, all of which the applicant has incorporated into the design before you tonight. Lastly, the applicant has provided a summary of their neighbor outreach efforts, included as Exhibit 28 with your staff report, and public comments are attached as exhibits to the staff report addendum and desk items that were prepared for this evening. Staff recommends that the Planning Commission consider the proposal, and if it is determined that the project has merit, approve the application subject to the recommended conditions included as Exhibit 25. This concludes staff's presentation. We are available to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions of staff? I had one, and that concerns the LRDA. What is the requirement for building in the LRDA or construction in the LRDA? Does that pertain only to the residence itself, or does that apply to other structures as well?
The Hillside Development Standards and Guidelines would say that it applies to all structures.
Okay, so the fact that the garage is outside of the LRDA is an exception then?
It's continued to be requesting an exception, correct?
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Okay. So now the applicant has 10 minutes to speak, and I have card Jerry Caruso, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Should I go ahead? Okay. Good evening, Chair and members of the Planning Commission. My name is Jerry Caruso. I'm a new member of the applicant's team. I'm a city planner, and I came on right after the last hearing. I just would like to thank you for having us again and giving us another opportunity to present our project. I'd also like to thank staff. They've been extremely helpful through this whole journey, exceptionally helpful, as a matter of fact. And tonight we want to emphasize that we heard the concerns from the commissioners, the public, and staff at the last meeting. I'm hoping we can convey to you that we brought forward a project that addresses all of those concerns and meets the intent and purpose of the Hillside Development Standards and Guidelines. This first slide is of the overall site plan. I just put this up here just to emphasize that although it shows a 1.65 acre gross lot area, out of this entire parcel, the least restrictive development area is located just at the very north side, and it is only 6,065 square feet. So we've already been cut down to 8% of the original gross lot area when developing the site. And before going into the changes we've made, I'd also just like to point out that we've kept the same location of the access driveway. It's been located, designed, and to be graded and accepted by the fire department for access and turnaround, and feel that it is the best option, and so we kept it there. The following 4 slides also are included in your packet. The LRDA is shown with kind of the curved smiley dash line. And in some of these, you'll also see dash lines off to the side that show the outline of the previous proposal. In this slide, the current plan is on top and the previous plan is on the bottom. This slide demonstrates where the new plan reduced the percent of the building footprint projecting into the LRDA by 40%. It reduced the footprint inside the LRDA by approximately 500 square feet, or 16%. The length of the building, as Sean mentioned, has been reduced by 21 feet or 18%. And I know that's a lot of numbers, but I'm hoping it's a way of conveying that the changes we made were meaningful, and then I'll show you how they became effective visually. This slide just simply shows the garage, and it's on the lowest level. It's still partly located in the LRDA. Overall, the garage was reduced 280 square feet from the last proposal. That's 24%. This is the mid-level, this first living area, and the changes here take place entirely within the LRDA. The mid-level was reduced by 432 square feet, 14%. You can also see the dashed lines that show the width and where it was reduced 12 feet and 9 feet respectively on the west and east sides. This slide demonstrates the changes to the living area on the upper level. It's, again, brought in 8 and 9 feet on either side. The total level reduction in the upper level was 370 square feet, or 14%. And when you take everything inside the LRDA and outside, within the LRDA and within the house, the total reduction for the entire site, as Sean mentioned, was close to 1,080 square feet. And that's a total of 16% reduction in the entire project. This is the first elevation I'll talk about. Again, the general 16% reduction in the project size, we believe, has very effectively translated into a reduced visual massing of the house, as shown in this and the next slide, and other elevations that you have in your packet. And in this, you can see on the side the dashed lines that represent where the previous project was. This slide shows two versions of the south elevation, with and without landscaping and tree coverage. In addition, I'd just like to mention on this slide, Sean mentioned it, that Larry Clannon, the city's consulting architect, has written that the design changes were substantial. He favorably states that the overall design is markedly improved and now has a clearly distinguishable architectural style. The applicant, as Sean mentioned, has accepted all of Larry Cannon's recommendations, and these are already included in the elevations that you see. And this is the west elevation. This is the elevation where there was some concern by some commissioners and members of the public how it had previously appeared as a 3-story elevation. The applicant has modified this elevation by taking advantage of the garage location that's been pulled into the LRDA. And so then on the left side, they've wrapped around a retaining wall around the lower portion of this elevation and used that wall to berm landscaping up to the house and mask the cellar and provide a distinctive 2-story effect. This slide shows two views, one with and without the conceptual landscaping. I believe this slide also demonstrates how well the garage location, although it is been pulled into the LRDA, it creates the preferred effect of the house stepping down the hillside. So that concludes my comments. I'm going to turn it over now to Nin Lee, who is the civil engineer, and he's going to take it from here. You want to use this?
Push to
There.
forward. Good evening, Commissioners. I'm here to address two of the concerns that were brought up at the last meeting, the grading, the excavation volume, and the depth of excavations. We addressed your concern by reduce the house footprint. We raised the garage finished floor by 1/2 feet, and we raised the mid-level finished floor by 3 feet. The result is a 1,382 cubic yard of excavations, which is a reduction of 1,509 cubic yard from the first submittal plan that we submitted to the commissions, and 916 from the last meeting. So it's a substantial reduction in terms of quantity. If you compare that to flat lot area, it's very comparable with the footprint and with the depth of excavations. The maximum depth of cut as shown on section DD on the slide on the left side is about 18 feet. That depth of cut is from the existing ground all the way to the bottom of the mid-level. I understand that the town of Los Gatos hillside design standard and guidelines. Sure.
Right.
No, I'm fine. The guideline recommended a maximum cut depth of 8 feet, but that 8 feet excludes the area that's defined as cellar. So if you take out the red outline area that's defined as a cellar area, then the maximum depth of cut is only about 5.3 or 5.2 feet, which is less than the maximum depth of cut recommended in the design standards and guidelines. I believe that with the changes that we made, we addressed the 2 concerns that were brought up at the last meeting. Thank you.
So that concludes our prepared comments. I'd just like to conclude by saying that the applicant has worked with staff. We believe we've made meaningful changes to address the comments that were previously came up at the last meeting. We've addressed architecture, square footage reduction, visual massing. We've reduced the impact of grading and excavation on the site. The remaining exceptions that we've asked for, I think, are very appropriate considering the entire restrictive nature of the site that we're building with. Our opinion is that the project meets the intent and purpose of the Hillside Development Standards and Guidelines, and we're hoping for your support tonight. And the entire applicant's team is here. Again, Neen Lee is a civil and can answer any questions you have about excavation and grading. Steve Yang is here, the architect, if you have further questions about that. And Sampan, the applicant, is also here. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there questions? Commissioner Hanson?
I'm not sure who could answer this, but I was wondering, we had also asked for the applicant to do additional neighborhood outreach, and I was wondering, we saw some letters of support. I just would like to hear, from the applicant's team about
Sure.
that.
I think he also submitted just an outline of who he went back out to and talked with, but I'll let Sam talk to you about his outreach. Okay.
Okay, almost every, good evening, all the commissioner. Okay, I'm a little nervous. Yeah, almost every weekend we try to go with a neighbor and try to show them, try to tell them what's a change and what's their concern. And I believe there's a couple of letters you already, maybe Sean already put in the file. And of course, some people, some neighbors, they told us, they are going to come to the meeting and ask for their concern. And also, if their concern is okay, they are going to support. That's almost every weekend. I believe it's 4 to 5 weekends. We try to reach a neighbor all around.
Thank you. Are there other questions?
Could I just one follow-up question? Were there any neighbors that you weren't able to reach that are like very close to your property that would be, their visibility or you would be looking down on them? Was there anyone you weren't able to reach?
Okay, just a second. My ear is not really good,
Sorry, can you please repeat your question again?
My question was, were there any of your neighbors that you would have wanted to reach that are close by that might be affected by the views of your property that you could not reach?
I don't think so. I think we were successfully reached out to all the neighbors, directly beside us or below, at the downhill of our site. I don't think there's any neighbor that we couldn't. Sometimes we missed in the previous week, but then we tried again, and then we were able to get hold of them, and we were able to show them the revised plan. So I believe we were able
now
to
we
out.
reach all the neighbors around.
Yeah.
That was my question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions? I have a question of Ms. Caruso. You presented some numbers about reductions in square footage, and Mr. Lay discussed some reductions in off-haul or fill and excavation. Is that in comparison to the January submission or to a previous submission? The number, specifically the numbers you presented,
Yes,
the 16%.
The numbers that I presented, excuse me, I'm sorry for interrupting. The numbers I presented are comparing it to the last January submission.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, we'd like to get to, Commissioner Hanson.
I did have one more question. It was about the excavation. And I do think that you probably addressed it in your presentation, but I wanted to be clear. It does seem, especially from the original design, that there's been a significant reduction of the cubic yards that are going to be reduced. And I was wondering if you could just repeat or say again, what were the things that made the biggest difference to get the
Well, the
total?
biggest difference is the reductions in the house footprint. Raise the finished floor of the garage and also raise the house by 3 feet. As you go deeper, you're going to increase the quantity because that area, especially the cellar area, you have to excavate below that. So by raising up, we were able to reduce the quantities. And the number that I presented is 1,509 cubic yard less than the first plan that we submitted to the commissioners, and 916 cubic yard from the last meeting, which was the January meeting.
And you're talking about the house, the driveway, and the site work
No,
altogether?
I'm
or
not talking
just the house?
about the driveway, because the driveway.
The driveway didn't
as
change.
designed
Right.
hadn't changed at all.
Okay, so you're just talking about the
Correct.
reduction from the house?
Just the house itself.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe I could follow up on that. It looks to me like the driveway excavation increased over the last one. Is that correct? I see it was 397 and 853, and now it's 530 and 978. What's the reason for that
That could be
increase?
because of the garage being pulled inside the LRDA, more inside the LRDA, instead of being pushing out on the low side of the hill.
Okay, so the driveway's a little bit longer to reach the house, the
Why-
reduced size
well,
of the house.
The garage is now more into the cut sections instead of the fill sections.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now we have opportunity for members of the public to speak, and the applicant will have minutes after the public speaks, I think 5 minutes. Card I have is Alan Rudolph. Mr. Rudolph, can we bring the microphone to him, please? And those are the only two cards I have, so if anyone else would like to speak, please complete a card.
Alan Rudolph, 258 Jared Lane, right next to the intended residence. As I've mentioned to you before, and I'm getting very used to speaking from this seat, I'm very worried about access to the site. Our Jared Lane is very, very narrow, as you know. I'm sure you've seen it. And we're having all kinds of problems with fires in California. And now you even have Notre Dame in a tragedy catching fire. And that was done, I guess, through construction. So we really have to make sure that we don't have any kind of vehicles or equipment parked on Jared Lane that would obstruct access. Did you receive the letter that I sent? Okay, so you've seen that, and so you know the incident. Sam is, a very personal person, and I'm sure he's very responsive. But, even in his best efforts already, the guy coming out to set up the story poles apparently parked in the wrong areas and stuff. And so that kind of stuff will happen, and we got to make sure that it stays off the road. It's not just for us getting out, but if a fire got started, obviously, you could have to spread very quickly uphill, going up towards Crescent and all the different residences beyond. And so it's a two-way thing. It's not just for exit, it's also for getting in. The last little bit that I mentioned on your letter that I sent to you is really true, because I was a commissioner back in the 1990s. So I know all the work that you have to do to go through all this stuff. And, lots of times people are really dissatisfied with decisions, but you truly make good decisions to benefit everybody. And so you're looking at like the land use, the design, the density, all kinds of different problems that go into just about every application. And so you're not commended for it very often, but you really deserve a heap of praise, really. People don't say it very often, but it's very true. You're spending all this time and you don't get any compensation except a better town. And so I really appreciate it. So thank you for considering the safety issue, because it's really important to make sure that the road is accessible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rudolph. Any questions? Commissioner Janoff.
Yeah, thank you for your comments. When you say Jared Lane, there's a portion of it that's private and a portion that is not. Is that correct?
Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Portion is private and a portion isn't.
The driveway?
Jared Lane.
Jared Lane.
So my
I'm kind of confused on that, because it's private, starting at my property line. It goes up to the Milligans, to another neighbor up above. Now, the first access, I think the town maps show that that's public, but I'm not sure if that's the case or not.
Okay,
I don't-
my question is, when you refer to traffic issues on Jared Lane, are you speaking about the entire length of Jared Lane or just the portion that's,
Yeah, the whole area, because it's narrow all the way up.
okay, thank you.
And so it's really got to make sure that, vehicles and equipment are not on Jared Lane. It could be a really critical problem.
Okay, thank you. Next speaker is Adge Anderson from Uplift Family Services.
Good evening. Is it on? I guess I wasn't talking straight into it. Good evening. It's AJ, by the way.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I got it wrong as usual.
Hi. So I'm from Uplift Family Services. I think you all know it is Eastfield Ming Kwong. So their property looks straight down onto our facility. And I've worked with Sam and Lucy many, I don't know, probably 5 times, I guess, since January. Looking at the overall footprint of their property, the story poles, and recently viewed the revised story poles, because it brought even though they've reduced it some and brought it up, the roof line is lower, which is great for us, because they were initially going to be looking straight down at where the swimming pool sits, and that would not be too terrific for our kids. Giving them exposure to, seeing what happens on our property. But during this, I guess since January, they have satisfied our need for providing security for our children and our clients that come to our facility. I'm not sure if you know, we've been there quite a long time. We're a 150-year-old facility for kids that are in trouble and their families. So it was with a lot of respect and honor that they brought forward to us in being thoughtful for our kids. So we gave them the green light, and we approved their project.
Thank you. Are there questions?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your comments. I have one more card. Mary Martin at 248 Jared Lane. And again, if anyone else would like to speak, please submit a card, and we'll get to you shortly.
My name's Mary Martin, and excuse me, I've lived at 254 Vista Del Monte for more than 40 years. And I'm sorry. It's aesthetics that I'm concerned about, because there's so many trees now. So many trees will have to be removed. And I'm concerned about, I've walked up to the site, and I'm not sure that in my lifetime the trees would go high enough to block. And in my experience, people who build on a hill want a view. And if there's trees, as they're promised to plant, it would obstruct the view. So I'm a little confused about that. But Sam and Lucy have been very kind in coming around very often, and even if I don't agree with them, as I said in my letter, there's a difference between endorsement and toleration. So I'm sort of at the toleration point.
Thank you. I had
Any
a
questions?
question about the trees. We have had a tree plan submitted with each of the applications, and on the one that I saw prior to January, I had requested that 27 trees be retained, and in the next iteration, they came back and it appears that they retained 24 of those 27 trees. I'm going to ask them about that again, but I'm just wondering if your comments are related to the specific trees of this very last application that we've seen.
Oh, it's not specific trees, it's just trees in general.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
Anything else?
Thank you. Next card I have is Zach Edmonds. And then Michael McDonough. Just please state your address.
Good evening. Zach Edmonds. My family and I live at 249 Vista Del Monte. I think we are probably the closest home to the proposed site. We have two concerns that we elucidated in the letter that we supplied to Sean. And the chief concern we have is just safety during construction. The grade of the hill, specifically below the driveway, is very steep, and it cascades directly down into our yard and close to our home. So we've requested that a chain link fence be supplied to help catch debris and rocks and other things that may come tumbling down that hill during construction. The other concern we have is just line of sight from our property. Both our master bedroom and our yard, we believe, has a pretty clear, direct line to the second floor bedroom master of the proposed property, as well as the balcony on that side. And so we just requested that plantings be instituted and maintained going forward.
Thank you. Questions? Commissioner Hanson?
So you've met with the applicant, and as to your concerns about the privacy, have they agreed to put in the appropriate screening so that they aren't able to view into your property?
We haven't discussed it per se, but we certainly appreciate the most recent plans that we reviewed with Sean last week, indicating what the landscape plan was.
And did it make you feel better about the privacy, what you saw in the most?
Somewhat. It's hard to get a sense for what it would actually look like based on the drawings, but we understand that, this to the same degree that we don't want line of sight, they probably also don't want line of sight. So it's probably in both of our interests to make sure those plantings are there.
And so you feel like after the project gets underway, that if there was an issue that you noticed, you have a good channel of communication with the applicant.
Oh, definitely.
To resolve that. Okay, good. Thanks.
Thank you. And Michael McDonough.
Hi. I'm Michael McDonough. I live at 253 Vista Del Monte, right below, the neighbor of Zach. He is about 5 feet closer than I am, so we're real close to the house. I'll just say Sam and Lucy have been extremely informative, supportive, and concerned about what we think about the construction. And that's nice to see. And that is something like an evolution that we saw as this process went through. So I'm supportive of their initiative, and however, there's always the buts associated with it. I believe that until the house is built, the driveway's in, we have completion, we won't really know, as Zach said so eloquently, what really it's going to look like. And the good thing is, though, I do have faith in our new neighbor, hopefully, so that they can remediate that, because it is a beautiful vista that we look over in the back. And I think we're okay, because I did take some time and look at the plans, but I don't know till it's totally completed. And I'm hoping that as good neighbors, if there is some adjustments here and there, that they will remediate that. So thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay, thank you. That's the last card that I have. So I would now invite the applicant to come back up and address anything you'd like. You have 5 minutes to add anything.
Okay, thank you. As far as the trees, I just wanted to mention that on C5, the C5 plan in your packet, it says there's a total of 225 trees on the site, and to remain is 183, and according to this plan. I'd like to also just close in saying that Sam has made a significant effort to work with his neighbors, and I think the comments you've heard from them tonight confirm that, and he's happy to continue to working with them as he moves into construction. There's been a lot of talk about, the impact of the size of the house, the grading, the massing, the architecture. And I think those are all things that we have addressed in a meaningful way and significantly improved the project based on the comments we heard. I'd just like to state a few other things about the that are stated in the Hillside Development standards and guidelines that we don't talk about much, but the applicants, part of it is due to the very restrictive site that he's working with, but they are, according to required by the guidelines, they're maintaining an open and wooded character of the lot. They're taking into consideration the topographic, drainage, and geologic constraints of the property, which is required, protecting a significant amount of trees. They're not really clear-cutting any vegetation except in the area for the driveway and the house. The guidelines recommend that the house be set into the hillside, which they've done. I know there's comment about the garage being pulled into the LRDA, but I think in the end, it goes towards that look of it being stepped down. And to address the concern, we reduce the size of that garage in the LRDA significantly. And I think they've made a great effort to design a house, but also preserve the natural environment of the lot. And with the natural camouflage that will be remained there, that showed up in some of the slides that we have, I don't believe the house dominates. I think it visually blends in with its surroundings, and now the architecture, as complemented by your peer review architect, I believe is compatible and complementary to the neighborhood. And that concludes our comments. Hope for your support. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Commissioner Janoff.
Thank you. I have a few questions. Regarding there were a couple comments regarding the trees and overall visual obscuring the view both ways. So you have addressed that you are planning to do landscaping to screen. Do you feel that the landscaping that you've proposed addresses the neighbors' privacy concerns?
I'm going to bring Sam back up for that because I wasn't involved in that portion of the design. I'm bringing Steve up, not Sam. Did you understand the question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Steve Yang, architect, and our landscaping architect for some reason cannot attend. I try to, on behalf of him, answer the question. And overall, we sat down together to discuss how we can make this house looking smaller or the privacy to the neighbor. That's why we came up with this west side berm with landscaping on the top. And that's one of the solutions because down the hill from the west side, there are 3 or 4 residents live there. They always talk about in the past how they don't want to see the house too dominant. That's why we create a landscaping there. And of course, our landscaping architects select a species that can serve that purpose. And talking to the south side, which is a longitudinal side, when people drive up, you see the house. But before you drive up, you almost don't see the house because it's hidden behind the general woods and the forest. But we do, because we have to remove certain trees along the driveway and the house itself, we do have, if you look at the drawing for the landscaping section there, which is, let me see, where's the best look, which is L, which is mounted on the wall there. You can really appreciate the landscaping we put on the side is very close to the house, and the camouflage everything. So for the privacy issue, of course, I was thinking that if I were the neighbor to the west, you almost see probably nothing except that during night you see the light coming from the house.
Well, let me ask a related question.
Right.
It's conceivable that the plans that have been developed and the plans presented to the neighbors might fall short of providing the privacy screening that the neighbors would appreciate, and probably you would appreciate as well. So my question there is, will you, or would you be willing, would the team be willing to install screening landscaping that in the future, present, whatever actually gets built, then you'll be able to see, you'll see from your perspective what down to the neighbors, and the neighbors in turn will see it. So the question is, would you be willing to take, at that point in time, the time to readdress the issue of privacy with your neighbors and provide additional planting or screening as mutually desired?
I guess I think on behalf of the owner, for the time being, it's hard to visualize because everything on paper, no 3D, no AI, nothing. So it's really hard for both sides of the property view the house. I think I 100% thinking this is a very smart way. I design housing in Los Altos Hills. They don't accept all planning at the beginning to accept that until 6 months after construction finished. They frame it over. Then they brought the neighbor, and they brought the owner, and they're standing there to look at what's the point which is critical. They can compromise. Then they plan some kind of screening there. That's the method I have been encountered. And you are mentioning that kind of method to mitigate the privacy issue. I voted yes. I think on behalf of owner is a contractor as well. Anytime he will be, of course, he will live there for the years to come. I believe he will say yes, I will do that.
So is it fair to summarize that the answer to my question is yes?
Yes, I think a very, very, very good suggestion.
Okay, and then related to that, another issue that the neighbors raised this evening was, every homeowner wants the view when they can get the view, so we expect maybe trees are going to be cut down in the future. In applications that we've heard this year even, we have requested that homeowners not remove trees that weren't planned to be removed during the construction, because that does change substantially the privacy on your neighbors. So the question is, would you be willing, I don't know that this is something that we can implement in the conditions of approval, but would you be willing to maintain the trees that are still standing following the completion of construction?
This is another good suggestion. We've been talking between, I think, Public Works, staff, owner, and my landscaping architect, myself. It's very difficult at the beginning to really pinpoint exactly which tree going to be removed because we don't know exactly the roots going, which direction. Maybe after we excavate for grading, we realize a certain tree can be salvaged and saved. We will certainly do that.
Yes, and I'm not speaking about during construction. I'm speaking after construction, when the project is finished, and you see that there's one tree that's obstructing your view. And the question is, can you commit to keeping the natural wooded landscape of your surrounding property intact?
Well, if after constructions and the owner wants to remove a tree, he would have to go through the town of Los Gatos to get a tree removal permit. A permit would be required for any tree removal at that time. Does that answer your questions, or?
Yes, thank you.
Yes. Commissioner Badami.
One of my concerns all along has been the 18-foot cut, and I think it was 19-foot cut, so you reduced it by 1 foot. But I'm concerned about that. It's a pretty significant exception that we would need to make, and I think you touched on it earlier that, oh, well, when you've got the cellar in there, it's really only a 5-foot deviation, but I don't quite see it that way. So can you elaborate on the need for such a significant cut and to help us with a compelling reason as to why we should grant that exception and how it fits into the vision and the purpose of the Hillside Design Standards and Guidelines?
I don't think this project requires exceptions. I mean, it's clearly stated in the design guideline is the 8-foot does not include the cellar area. I mean, it's stated in the ordinance. So when you calculate the depth of cut, you should exclude the cellar area. And the cellar area is the area that identified in the red outline. So there's no exception that's required for this project in terms of depth of cut.
All right, I'm looking at the staff report on page 5, and am I reading it wrong or interpreting it wrong? I'm going to ask staff.
So the applicant's civil engineer is correct for excavation depths within the footprint of a residence, which is different than grading outside of the footprint of the residence. For excavation depths, you are limited to 8 feet, although that 8-foot limitation is not applicable for below grade square footage. So this house has below grade square footage at the garage and the mid-level, and 18-foot excavation depths in that footprint of the below grade square footage, which is not an exception because that 8-foot doesn't apply. The civil engineer provided some clarification during his presentation that taking those areas away that are below grade square footage, the excavation depths are limited to between 5 and 6 feet, which would fall within that 8-foot limitation.
All right, thank you very much, and thank you.
Sure.
Other questions? I had a couple of questions about, first about the trees. In the previous hearing on January 9th, I noted that 23 out of the 27 trees that I had requested to be retained were in fact retained. My question is, since that time, are there any additional trees that will be removed?
Yeah, let me answer this question. Actually, I don't think it will be more tree is going to be removed. First of all, let me explain a little bit. We only have 4 size neighbor, okay? The tree we are going to remove is only under the footprint of the house and the driveway. So we have no way to avoid it without cutting that kind of a tree. Whatever it's not impacted to the house, and we will try to keep all the trees. Let me answer your question. The tree is a little different because, somehow we shrink the house, we can reduce the cutting, and somewhere like the Ning put the pond in the front, very lower front, and then the pond size is not big enough to holding the water. So we need to make the pond a little bigger. Then we need to cut more tree. But these 3 trees need to cut. It's not affect any neighbors because it's on the very bottom of just close to the road.
Just so we're really clear, I asked, are there any additional trees since the last? And are you saying that there are 3 additional trees that you're going to remove?
Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes.
3 additional trees?
Yes.
Okay, it was very difficult for me to read your tree report. It was not legible. So I'll ask staff about those trees and whether they are, absolutely necessary. I had another question about the construction and the parking on Jared Lane during construction. I'm seeing some things that aren't quite clear. So in the addendum that we received, addendum number 2, which comes from the town. The question says, will construction vehicles be allowed to park on Jared Lane? And there's two parts to that answer, I believe. One is, per the COA 65, vehicle parking within the right-of-way will only be allowed if it does not cause access or safety problems as determined by the town. But then I see the second part of that says, during the April PC meeting, the applicant's civil engineer stated that they will require the contractor to post signage that construction parking is not allowed on Jared Lane during construction. So my question is, are you willing to have no parking on Jared Lane during construction?
Yes, we are.
Okay, thank you. I think that was it that I had. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much. We now close the public portion of the hearing and have opportunity for questions of staff or discussion. Commissioner O'Donnell.
This is somewhat like your last question. When I look at the conditions, I look at particularly number 88, which is a construction management plan. This is a rather unique street. In many respects, it's really not a street, more than a path. And I understand the neighbors. That with the best of intentions, somebody will drive up and park right there because that's what they do. So what I'm wondering is if we could do something in the conditions. Somebody should, I'm assuming there's going to be a general contractor, and I wonder if we can place the burden on the general contractor, and maybe we already do, for the job maintenance, which is to say, it is the general contractor's responsibility to see that these parking restrictions and vehicle restrictions are maintained, because it's certainly been all of our experience that notwithstanding everybody intends to do this right, some guy drives up and parks his car because he wants to run over there for 10 minutes or whatever. But the best we can do, I think, is make somebody on the job site, or should be on the job site, responsible, saying, uh-oh, we better move the car. As opposed, well, there are other alternatives to that, but that's the easiest, and I'm wondering, can we do that?
Kevin Bagley, Parks and Public Works. I would recommend making the change to the vehicle restriction condition of approval. I believe that's 64 instead of the construction management plan. And if we state in there that we hold a certain party responsible for maintaining that no vehicles park on the street, at least we have somebody that the town can go and work with should a car be found there.
I look at 64, but it...
Sorry, I apologize. Condition of approval 65.
Okay, even 65, you've got to have somebody to do it. Yeah. You can have all the best intentions and statements in the world, but if you don't have somebody there to enforce it, I'm just wondering, can you put responsibility on someone to see that that's observed? All the people who are not here tonight and are not the general contractor are the people that are going to park on the path. And I would like to put some responsibility on somebody, and I can't think of anybody better than the general contractor. So the question is, can we put that in?
Yes, we can work on that wording.
I believe maybe Mr. Mullen wants to say something about that? No, you're okay. All right. Commissioner Hanson.
I had a couple questions for staff. I wanted to get back to, because we've seen this so many times, I wanted to make sure whatever motion we make, there are exceptions to the Hillside Design Standards and Guidelines, and they're listed in terms of generally what they are, not the specific numbers. So I know about the LRDA, there's a certain portion, it's a smaller portion now than was before that's going to be slightly outside of the LRDA. There's maximum retaining wall heights and lengths. What is, how much of an exception is that? And then the same for the maximum cut and fill depths, because I too, like Commissioner Badami, was confused because the staff report had a star and by the 18 saying it excludes below grade square footage. And so if it's true that we weren't reading the thing right, I just wanted to understand what it is we're approving in terms of exceptions to the Hillside Design Guidelines, if we go that direction.
Thank you. I can walk through them as best possible, kind of on the fly. Ultimately, what would be included in any approval with these exceptions would also be the development plans. And when they submit for building permits, the development plans need to be in substantial conformance with what was approved. So if an exception were to go wildly, to increase wildly, then that would be considered a revised architecture and site application and could end up back in the Planning Commission. I just wanted to put that out there first. Regarding the length and height of the walls, those are the walls along the driveway. The length is over 50 feet. I do not have the running length because we sort of stopped talking about the driveway a while ago, but I know that the height exceeds 5 feet, and the specific height, maximum height, is 8.3 feet along the driveway. The development outside the LRDAs relative to the garage at this point, the original exception that we saw at the very beginning had to do with portions of the house as well, but it's just limited to the garage at this point, and the square footage is noted in the plans on sheet, make sure I look at the right plans. Sheet AS2, and the footprint outside of the garage is noted to be 587 square feet. So that would be the other exception.
And then the cut and fill?
The cut and fill, there are some depth cut exceptions relative to the driveway again, and limited to the driveway. You have a cut depth where 4 foot is the maximum. They're proposing 15, and a fill depth where 3 feet is the maximum. They're proposing 12. And that's been consistent from the second meeting we had of the 4.
And then to confirm what you had said earlier, then we're not giving an exception for the maximum cut and fill for the house itself because of the below grade square footage is the bulk of the 18 feet, and the rest of it would be the above ground would be 5 to 6 feet, which is under the 8.
That's correct.
Is that correct? Okay.
That's correct.
Okay, because where my line of thinking was going in was, this was heard also back in 2011, and they didn't give as much detail then, but they were talking about numbers like 16 feet, and so where I was going with the thing is, this is a difficult property to build on, and that it might not be possible to do it, but you're saying basically that because of the below grade square footage, it is actually possible to stay within the guidelines for the house anyways. Just not the driveway.
Relative to the excavation depths, yes.
Okay, so I did get that right.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Other questions? Commissioner Janoff.
I don't mean to be too picky, but you said if the plans are revised wildly, I think if the plans are revised much, we would be concerned because we're spending so much time talking about cut and fill and exceptions. So I know that this is most likely staff's discretion, but I would just hope that it's like none.
Maybe wildly was too strong of an adjective.
Okay, thank you.
I'll say that my experience with the town is when an architecture and site application is approved and revisions occur during construction or during review of the initial construction documents, any revision is looked at and considered very carefully. And on a case-by-case basis, we do discuss it with all of staff, including the planning manager and the planning director, to use our discretion to determine whether it's a significant, which is probably a more appropriate adjective, significant revision versus something that is within the scope of the project that was approved.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
I'd like to go back to the trees for a moment. My understanding, because we spent a lot of time on the trees, was that as of the last meeting, at least, we knew which trees were going to be removed. And the chair in particular went over that with, I thought, finely. Tonight we heard that possibly there might be 3 more trees. To the extent that we've approved whatever trees were going to be taken out, we have not been asked to approve any more trees being taken out. So I guess I'm wondering, what is the process when somebody has an approved plan, they say we're going to take out X number of trees and we approve that. And then, oh, by the way, they're sitting here tonight and saying, oh, then we're going to take out 3 more. Well, my recollection is if the diameter of the tree is whatever is 6 inches or whatever, you need a permit per tree. But secondly, what's the point of having the whole plan? I guess, to put it another way, to take out any more trees, they have to get somebody to approve it, right?
If they are considered protected trees, yes. And that would be done initially, the application would go through the Parks and Public Works Department for a tree removal permit. When there's a architecture and site approval and an open construction building permit, then Parks and Public Works would communicate with the planner responsible to then look at why these trees need to come out. And again, back to Commissioner Janoff's question, if it's a significant deviation from what was approved, once we review it at the staff level, then we would take the correct path, whether it's back to the Planning Commission or through an administrative process.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that, since we've spent a lot of time on the trees, that the default position is that's what you're going to take out. And if they want to take out some other trees, I'm not saying you should not be able to approve that, but I think you're saying you look at it, and if it's minor, because that's the point that's being made here, you have discretion to do that. If it's anything more than minor, then that's a different issue.
I think that's correct. I would also point out that in our town's tree preservation ordinance, there's a section that talks about the trees that were in place at the time or to remain at the time of the architecture and site approval need to remain. And if you need to remove something, you would have, it clarifies that you would have to go through a tree removal permit. And there's a 5-year kind of lifespan to that. You're welcome.
And just to follow up on that, is it your understanding that there are 3 additional trees in this application that'll be removed?
My understanding of the application is based on the table on sheet C5. Previously, in January, there were 40 trees to be removed, and now they're showing 38. The applicant, if allowed to open up the public hearing again for a question, the applicant it seems to me they're talking about if a retention pond needed to be expanded, for instance. But I'm using the numbers that were provided to me. There's actually a 2-tree reduction in removal.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Janoff?
Yeah.
One last issue that was raised by the public is with regard to some sort of a chain link fence to protect against debris fall. Is that provided for in the existing conditions of approval, or is it the opinion of staff that such a debris fence is warranted?
It is not provided for in the existing conditions of approval. It could be added, and I would default to Kevin Bagley from the Parks and Public Works Department whether it's something that may be appropriate.
The current conditions of approval require site security fencing to be shown on the construction management plan, which would be submitted for the building and or the grading permit sets. And we can check then just to make sure that the site security fencing also serves to protect that neighbor from any debris that falls down the mountain as the concern was raised.
Yes, please include that if necessary.
Okay.
Thank you. Commissioner O'Donnell?
Maybe somebody can help me, and maybe my recollection isn't correct, but I was looking at some of the fencing, and I think as it goes along the driveway, there's a fence, but there's also mesh. And I'm trying to jibe that with what we've just done on our fencing ordinance, where we talked, I thought, that we weren't in favor of mesh, and yet that is what the drawing shows. So what is our position on that?
This was a conversation I had probably a year and a half ago with the building official. The tops of those retaining walls are greater than whatever the trigger inches is off the ground. It's either 42 or 36 inches off the ground. So there needs to be some sort of protection from someone falling off that. The same thing would happen if you had a deck. So that protective fencing has to be, we should restrict a certain diameter sphere from passing through it. So the mesh meets that requirement. So it's a building code issue.
It is a building code.
How that connects with the free passage of, we went through all this stuff about the free passage of animals, and they don't pass through mesh. So I guess this is an awfully long fence with mesh, isn't it?
Well, I would point out that it's limited to the top of 8-foot walls. So the likelihood that an animal is trying to pass through that limited portion of the site is probably pretty low. And also, it doesn't run the full length of the site top to bottom. It's limited to those portions of the wall where it is required.
And
If you
just
look
to-
at L3, I'm getting help here. If you look at L3, so that's where I saw the mesh. And it doesn't say how many feet that is. And it also, I can't tell whether it's 8 feet, it would be an 8-foot fall during the whole length of it. But if you look at L3, does that indicate that we'll have mesh over the whole area as shown?
It indicates to me that the mesh would be installed where required by the building code. So they're saying a 42-inch high split rail fence with deer mesh for the 4-inch minimum safety dimension. That's referencing the sphere passing through it. So where it is required by the building code, they'll need to install it.
And you call it deer mesh?
They're just using a term deer fencing. Typically it's the 2x4 welded wire mesh.
So just to add to what Mr. Mullen is saying is it is a building code requirement, and it's more like a guardrail in that sense than a fence. So the 4-inch sphere is a child's head, and as maybe Commissioner Birch knows, that's where the code comes to provide, prevent choking in a safety guardrail.
Other questions of staff, or would people like to start discussion on this? Commissioner Birch?
I'll start the conversation. I want to commend the applicant on the revised design. I feel that it is, I think, exactly what I was looking for from our last meeting with our recommendations. I have no problem with the garage being outside the LRDI, as was stated, because it does create the step-down effect, which I think was missing in the previous application, along with the berm. I think that is definitely an enhancement to the aesthetics on that side. I also feel that the architectural style has been much more defined and is much more pleasing to the eye than what we had seen before, particularly in the front with the large stairway. I know that we had discussed that quite a bit. I would not have any problem at this point approving this application. I looked at our notes from our last meeting before this meeting, and I feel that all the items that we had concerns about, the neighborhood outreach, the mass and scale, particularly on the west side, their change to the trees, I feel they've met all of our requirements or all of our requests, but I would be curious what my other commissioners think.
Commissioner Hanson?
I would ask the questions about the hillside design guidelines, because at the end of the day, we have the hillside design guidelines so that we don't have to have exceptions, and that people can try and find a way to make it work. But this is a very difficult lot to build on, in that it has a very limited LRDA, and there's a big slope and everything. So after hearing the staff's comments on the exceptions to the hillside design guidelines, including the LRDA, the maximum retaining wall, and the maximum cut and fill depths, I'm feeling comfortable about that, especially the maximum cut and fill. When we looked at this before, the driveway does require well out of that, but you have to find a way to get into the house. And this driveway design is approved by the Santa Clara County Fire Department, so there really isn't any other way around that. And otherwise you couldn't build on the property. So I'm at this point, I'm comfortable with the exceptions to the hillside design guidelines. And as well, I feel like I wanted to commend the applicant for coming back and actually doing what we said, and trying to listen to our concerns and making those changes.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Yeah, I just want to join in with that. This has been one of the most dramatic changes and responsive changes I've seen in a long time, and so I really want to compliment the applicant, because some people kind of fight you every inch of the way. These people listened, and they came back trying to meet what we requested, and I can't say enough about that, and so I want to compliment them on that. And I agree with the previous two speakers too. This is a proposition or an application that I can support.
Commissioner Janoff?
Yes, I echo the comments of my fellow commissioners, and also wanted to make a specific comment about the garage outside the LRDA. While the LRDA is being violated per se, the land itself is being less impacted by pulling it out rather than excavating. And I understand that the excavating depth may not be counted, but it's still a big impact on the hillside. So I appreciate you taking the time to work through that issue. I do feel you've been extremely responsive to the Planning Commission's comments, and I am in full support of the project.
Commissioner Birch?
Unless there's any other comments, I'm willing to venture a motion. Okay. I did forget my glasses, so if I forget, it doesn't work. I have astigmatism. So if I say something wrong, I will trust you guys will jump in. I will make the motion that we approve architecture and site application S-16-054 located at 248 Jared Lane. This is requesting approval for construction of a new single-family residence and removal of large protected trees on vacant property zoned HR1 APN 532-34-071. And Mr. Mullen, can I, rather than trying to read this with no glasses, say that I can make the findings as noted in the staff? Thank you very much. Along with those, I would like to make a couple additional comments. I don't know if this would be placed under item 64 or 65 in the conditions of approval, but I would like that the general contractor include in their construction plan signage that will be placed along Jared Lane restricting construction parking, and I will request that the superintendent's name and phone number be posted on that signage for contact if there's any violations. And my second question, Mr. Mullins, to you is, I assume this approval is going to be based on the set of drawings we were looking at, and so I don't need to reference a drawing and a date as far as like the trees, that my approval is based on the tree plan. Okay. Then that would be my motion.
Commissioner Hanson?
I second the motion.
Any discussion? Okay. I would just maybe add a comment. I will be supporting the motion. And again, very appreciative of the dramatic changes that were made during this process. I think it's very important. And I would encourage the owner to carefully monitor what's going on with the parking on Jared Lane, and also to take any feedback about the trees and the screening as the project progresses. We can't require anything specific there, but I think that would be very helpful if the owner were willing to do that. So with that, I'll call the question. All in favor? Aye. Okay. Opposed? So it passes 6-0 unanimously. Thank you very much. Are there, thank you. Are there appeal rights for this?
Yes, there are. The decision of the Planning Commission is appealable to the Town Council on forms available in the clerk's office within 10 days of the decision of the Commission.
Okay, thank you. We're at 8:15. I think we have one more item. Do we want to take a quick break? 5-minute break? We're fine. Okay. We will reconvene at 8:20. Thank you. Session, and we have, the next item is item number 3, which is a review of the capital improvement program, which the Planning Commission is meant to forward a recommendation on this. So, Mr. Morley, I think you have a report for us.
Thank you. I am pleased to bring to you our 5-year capital improvement program this year, and happy with the program. It's quite a good capital improvement program. The role of the Planning Commission in a capital improvement program is to review the program for its compliance with all of the specific plans and the general plan, and to review it for compliance with CEQA, and to make a recommendation to the council on moving it forward. I just wanted to highlight a couple of the better projects that I see in the plan that we're adding this year. So, because it's an ongoing CIP and it goes from year to year, and it's a 5-year program, there are projects that you saw last year as a Planning Commission that remain in the plan, and every year we add a couple to that as we're advancing our priorities. So, I'll just touch on a couple of them real quick because they are sort of neat, and then I'll end and let you guys hit me up with questions if you have them. One of the big ones that we've been excited about is a guardrail replacement program. We're excited about it. It doesn't seem all that great, but we're excited about it because we have $1 million in grants that is funding that. So that's a big grant that we got over the last year. So we've had a great focus on obtaining grant money, using other people's money to fund our projects, and this is an example of that. So a pretty neat thing for that, and obviously the safety element on that is super important. Also in the area of safety, we had a tragedy at Missal and Highway 9 a while back, and we have a project coming forward to do some improvements there. And so that's new in the CIP this year, and we're happy to move that one along. We have several areas that we're focusing on ADA improvements. One is an ADA transition plan that we're funding this year that will help us identify all of the needs throughout the town, whether it be on the streets or in the buildings, to become more ADA compliant so that we can continue to make progress with that. So we'll do that study over the course of the year and have a list of unfunded needs with that, but it'll guide us in moving forward with the most priority projects in the future. Moving to the parks section. Given the fire risk and the high potential that we see here in our neighborhoods, we are asking for funding for vegetation management. It'll be a 2-phased process. One will be doing a study for our open spaces to make sure that we can remove fuel and not step on CEQA and get in the way there. So it'll be a study to identify what the process is for removing that fuel. And the second is to implement some of that vegetation removal as well, with a big focus on our hillsides and our open space. We have also put in for a FEMA grant for vegetation management as well. The FEMA grant takes a little bit longer to catch up, but we're also, again, looking to use other people's money. And then on the facility side, the facilities include a whole gamut of projects, but mostly around public buildings. We're looking to do some waterproofing work analysis at our parking lot 4, which is a double-deck parking lot where we have some water intrusion issues, as well as here at the Civic Center. And then on the ADA front, again, we have several projects here that will improve some of our restrooms. So the restrooms right outside the door here, near where the building inspectors used to be, as well as restrooms in the senior center across the way that need to be brought up to code. So those are some of the highlights of the CIP. Again, I'm pleased to bring it to you tonight and look forward to your input. And I'm here to support the conversation.
Okay, questions? Commissioner Hanson.
I just had a quick question. It was because we went to all this trouble of doing the bicycle and pedestrian master plan. I was just curious. I didn't see a whole lot of things. There was a few things in the plan about that, but and I know there's a lot of other priorities. But I mean, how do you feel like we're doing in terms of progressing along implementing the bicycle and pedestrian plan?
I think we're making great strides. So a couple of highlights there. We're continuing to work on a trailhead connector to the Los Gatos Creek Trail from Highway 9. Again, looking for grant money to help us along with that. So that's been a great project that we're moving forward. Very shortly, you'll see some improvements before the end of summer on Blossom Hill Road near Roberts Road East that will put in our first separated bike lanes. So that'll be a neat improvement for us, especially given the Safe Routes to School area there. So great projects there. We're also beginning to look at another potential bike ped crossing over Highway 17. And that would be in the area of Blossom Hill Road. And we haven't identified the exact location yet, but we have begun the initial work to do that study and figure out where the best location for that might be. So lots of good projects.
And that last one I saw was in there. This is it's for a design, and then you would put it out to bid and raise funds for it.
Yeah, it's a little bit strategic. So it's a great opportunity for additional grant dollars, and we're more competitive for grants if we have a design in hand. So they like shovel-ready projects, and so this is our effort to move it to a shovel-ready project.
All right, perfect. Thanks.
Commissioner Birch.
Last year, it seems like we had a lot of conversation about the cut-through beach traffic. So a couple years ago, we closed. Last year, we didn't. So I was wondering how those, from year to year, what you found to be the best plan and how we're planning on doing things this year and what kind of contingency we have if that fails.
Yeah. So I think what we've learned is every time we put something in place to try and change cut-through traffic, we create impacts elsewhere. So other people suffer for the changes where we try and create relief in one particular area. So we're trying not to chase the issue around town anymore, and we're trying to address it more locally. The big push that we have this year is promoting the downtown and making it more bike and ped friendly. We'll do that with our one-way street pilot over the course of the summer. We're doing it with a marketing campaign that it will be called Experience Los Gatos. So we'll have some branding around that. We'll have parklets along North Santa Cruz Avenue that will help us experience what could be wider sidewalks in the future. So as we're looking at downtown revitalization, this is the start of what could the downtown look like in 6, 7, 10 years in the future, and how do we want to start to move in that way. So it's really an educational effort this year to start to shape the downtown. As for how that interacts with beach traffic, I think it's as you're driving through going to the beach, you're probably not going to stop. You've got sort of tunnel vision on where you're going, but maybe you'll see something that makes you want to come back. So the parklets and the inviting areas of the downtown, the one-way street and the lesser traffic should be something that's more inviting to folks and encourages them to come back to Los Gatos as a destination.
Yeah.
So just a follow-up question. You talked about the parklets, and that was one of the things I wanted to ask about. Will those be only the town doing? Are we going to invite the local businesses to also create little parklets in front that maybe represent them too?
Great question. So we do have a business. So the answer is yes. We have both. We have a business program that's in place now, and businesses can apply, and we have quite a bit of activity on that. So I would expect before summer that we see some what we're calling more permanent parklets, so longer term parklets that the businesses put in place, and that will be a really neat aspect of the downtown. We'll also do some gathering place type parklets with our one-way street pilot, and those will be protected areas of parking spaces that we do casual, sort of bright colored bistro tables and chairs and Adirondack chairs, that kind of a thing for people to gather. That won't be as business focused, but more of a casual place for folks to gather and enjoy the downtown.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
On the beach traffic thing again, and not to belabor it because I know how hard that is, but if you go one-way streets, and I find you only have two streets to deal with. You've got Santa Cruz Avenue, you've got University, and since I go down University all the time because I live at Forbes Mill. When people want to go right as they go down University and they get to Main, and then the pedestrians go across and they get a 10-second warning that now we can go across, and then people who want to turn right block everybody who wants to go left. And if that's a one-way street, which way does it go?
So University will remain two-way. So North Santa Cruz will be the only one-way street, and it actually won't be fully one-way. It'll be one way from Elm, which is the first street after Main Street, to Bachman, which is up towards the other end of the street. There's some strategy to that. The strategy is to try to keep cars coming into the downtown versus skirting around the outskirts of it. And also to avoid cars turning from Main Street up towards the residential streets of the Almond Grove. So if it were to start at Main Street, we'd anticipate folks would turn left there as they're coming into town and head into the Almond Grove. And we don't want to try and impact the residential streets.
Have you ever thought about doing something with the light at University and Main? Because when that becomes a major bottleneck, which it does, I mean, I've parked my car and walked home.
As have I.
And it's principally because of that right turn lane, because it blocks everybody. And if the signals were changed to accommodate that, we treat it like it's just a normal intersection, and it's not. Have you people thought at all about doing something? Maybe you already have and it didn't work, I don't know.
So we are limited a lot by infrastructure and the amount of time, and then if we extend the vehicle, what do we do with the vehicle green? What do we do with pedestrians, and vice versa? And if we extend green for one direction, then it impacts the other directions and can create other impacts up the way. So we try to tweak that. We do adjust it during the summer to try and give us as much time as we can to clear those intersections. But we're really, because of the infrastructure in that place and how narrow the roadway is, we're quite limited. But it doesn't mean we won't stop looking at it. We look at it every summer and try to make adjustments to make it function better.
Thank you.
I had a question, if I may, on the pilot of the one-way. Do we have criteria for evaluating that pilot to know whether it's good or bad?
So if we're looking for, we haven't established quantitative sort of what are the numbers criteria. We fully expect to do a ton of outreach to the public and get business feedback and resident feedback on how it works. So that'll be our number one guidance. But also some of the observations that we make. So who are people using the parklets? Does it seem vibrant in the downtown over what we would expect? What happens on the 2 or 3 hours of Saturday morning when there's beach traffic? What does it look like during that? Are there impacts to residential streets? Do our traffic counts go up in residential streets? So some of that information we'll have. Some of it is good for collecting data, and some of it is a little bit more subjective.
Because I suspect there will be a lot of reaction to doing that, and I think it would be helpful to establish some evaluation criteria for the pilot before conducting it, so that we can really have a good conversation when it's over about whether this is something we want to continue.
That makes a lot of sense.
Just a suggestion there. Anything else? Yes, Commissioner Birch.
Sorry, one last question. I may have missed it, but what do we do as far as just ongoing maintenance in our parks for all the moles? You know that little play lot by my house? Mm-hmm. My friend actually broke her ankle there by stepping into a hole. And that one is terrible because we've got the water thing behind us and all the ivy. We have so many moles. But I didn't see anything in here for fills. Yeah, killing the moles.
So that's in our operating budget, and
it is.
We do have a contract for gopher abatement, mole abatement.
Could I request that they come over there?
Yes, absolutely.
Really bad.
And we're always we rely on the eyes of residents to help us with our work. So anybody who has a need, they can send us an email at ppw@losgatos.ca.gov. Really easy email address, and we'll get somebody out there to take a look at it.
Cool. So. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think we need a motion on this, correct?
Yes, please.
Okay. So, yes, Commissioner O'Donnell?
Correct me if I remember it incorrectly, but I think we're supposed to make a motion that we've reviewed this and we recommend approval of it. And that's the motion I'm making.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Hanson?
I'll second the motion.
Okay, I'll call a question. All in favor? Opposed? Passes unanimously 6-0. Okay, that's our last, except we have a couple of reports. So, report from Mr. Paulson, Director of Community Development.
Thank you. Extremely briefly, we had a General Plan Advisory Committee meeting last night where we discussed the vision and the potential modifications to the vision for the general plan. And we will have an additional meeting next Tuesday on April 30th here in the council chambers at 7 p.m. And we'll continue that discussion of vision as well as diving into guiding principles. And then I just want to plug once more, we still have a lot of committee recruitment opportunities. The deadline for those recruitments is, I believe, June 7th, and the information is available on the clerk's website.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Do we have any questions? All right, any other subcommittee reports? Anyone? Okay, Commissioner Hanson.
Well, Director Paulson did talk about the GPAC meeting, but I did want to say that since I'm the chair and Commissioner Janoff is the vice chair and Commissioner Birch is also on the committee, that we had a really great discussion last night, and everyone had a lot to contribute to the vision. And it's a work in progress in that we'll be, revisiting the draft of it. And I wanted to commend in particular both Commissioners Birch and Janoff, because they actually kind of took the lead in drafting up a sample of what the vision could look like, that everyone could look for. And everyone was kind of like, that's going to be helpful. And we were using the examples of some other jurisdictions, but, kind of making it our own. So I thought that process went really well, and I wanted to give a shout out to both of them for all that they did. And we're looking forward to continuing our discussion next week.
Great, thank you. Glad we're making progress on that. The other committee that met earlier today was Historical Preservation Committee, and we had 11 items on our agenda. 62 Ellenwood was continued. 216 Glenridge was pulled from consent but then approved. 247 Edelin was approved. 79 Reservoir Road was approved to remove from the historic inventory. 25 West Main Architecture and Site was approved. And 103 Tate was also approved. We had some other business where we provided some feedback on 114 Millrich Drive and 50 University Avenue, and then we reviewed a change to the demolition regulations, and I think there's maybe still some more work on that, but we did forward a recommendation to approve that. Thank you. That's the historic preservation. And thank you for bearing with us on this long meeting, and appreciate everyone's time. This meeting is adjourned.